Hello, everyone. Welcome to Investing for Beginners. My name is Safia Quinn, and today we are going to talk about inflation. Okay, one of the major buzzwords going around now. We are going to dive into inflation and its definition, its causes, how it affects you, and its how we measure it. Okay, in today's economy. This video I will definitely try to keep to 10 minutes. We may have to do a part 2, okay? But let's start. Inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices of goods and services rises over time, leading to a decline in the purchasing power of money. Okay? In simpler terms, when inflation occurs, the same amount of money that you have, now you will buy fewer services and goods than before. Okay, so let's rest with that concept. So I have $100, right? When inflation is at a certain percentage, $100 gets me 20 items at the grocery store. When inflation is at a higher percentage, it gets me less than 20 items. When inflation is at a lower percentage, it gets me more than 20 items. Okay? Inflation is that flux that we are currently dealing with, right? That's a huge thing. I saw eggs were actually up to almost $11 now, and they've actually even started to put a cap on them. So, inflation. Okay, so there are three types of inflation causes, okay? One is called demand pull inflation. That is when the demand of goods and services exceeds the supply, causing the price to rise. Okay, we can think about that as COVID, when things were in high demand, right? But there were, people weren't working, people were off, people were working from home. So there was a demand, but it exceeded the actual supply of these things. And so therefore the price rose. Therefore those in power rose the price. Cost push inflation is the second type of inflation. This is when production cost, which is wages, the actual cost of paying people, and raw materials, the actual material used to create things, increases, and that pushes prices higher. I go back to COVID. At that time, we were, me and my husband, we had a farm, and he was building with wood, and the price of wood had skyrocketed. This is about 2021. It was skyrocketed. So the price of raw materials increases, so therefore the price of them increase. And the third one is monetary inflation. When there's too much money in circulation, when there's too much money, inflation rises, so it reduces its value. Out of each one of these concepts, demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and monetary inflation, I do want you guys to understand that this is a purposeful pulling and pushing of our buying power, okay? Now, how this affects you. We talked about it, higher prices, right? When inflation increases unexpectedly, there are higher prices for the things that we buy every day. Gas, groceries, those things become more expensive. Reduced savings value. So meaning, if I save $100, remember we talk about saving, that's a big deal. But in high inflation, my $100 doesn't have as much value, right? Because my $100 is not going as far. So that's how inflation affects you. And that's why they say you can't save yourself to wealth, right? Because your money, your actual savings does not combat inflation, okay? Next one is higher interest rates. The feds may raise interest rates to slow inflation, making loans, mortgage and car loans more expensive. So this kind of has to do with monetary inflation. When there's too much money, people want to buy. And that puts a strain on the demand and supply market, right? So the feds have the power to raise interest rates to discourage you from making more purchases, okay? Last one is an investment impact, which we know. stocks and real estate assets may rise in value while cash loses purchasing power. That's what we just talked about. So before I go on, I want to show you from The Intelligent Investor, Benjamin Graham, here on page 62. You might not be able to see this chart clearly, but let me see if we can get up close. So if you can see that these types of lines, these high, I'm going to say outline lines, those are stocks. And these solid lines are inflation. At every point in history, stocks have outperformed inflation. I'm going to say this again. At every point in history, your stock return has outpaced inflation. At every point in history, your stocks have outpaced inflation, because you can't save yourself to wealth, because your dollar, your $100 does not have the same impact unless it's in a stock or the stock market, which what does stock market want to do? It wants to rise unless it has something pushing it. Your savings in your mattress, in that shoebox, there is nothing pushing that money to produce more money, right? There's nothing doing it, okay? So I will have to do a part 2. I apologize. But we're talking about inflation, okay? The causes of inflation are demand pull inflation. That's when the demand of things exceeds the supply and it causes prices to rise. Cost push inflation, when the production cost of wages and raw material increases, that pushes the price up. And monetary inflation, when there's too much money in circulation and therefore it has a reduced value. Now, what we're going to talk about in the next video, I have to do a part 2 for inflation, because what we're going to talk about in the next video is how we measure inflation and why we even have inflation. I never hear anyone asking why. Why is it even a thing? Let's talk about it, and we'll talk about what you can do personally, right? I know I told you stocks hedges against inflation, right? But what are some things you can do in your own personal life about changing some of your consumer habits to ease the pressure of inflation on your everyday life, okay? Inflation, we're going to have to do a part 2.